Hi, my name is Charlotte Saad Lechlak. I was born in Toledo, Ohio, the third child, the daughter of George Saad and Nahil Zuckham. I was born there and raised all my life in Toledo, Ohio, until I got married and had children, remained in Toledo, and then in 1990 moved to California with my husband to be closer to my family who had migrated there. My parents are from Kfar, Lebanon. I have long wanted to visit Kfar. I have wanted to find out more about my parents, how they were raised, because I only had the stories that they were willing to share with me over the many years. So it was very interesting this past year, couple of years, that I've asked a group of my friends who are from the same village if they'd like to travel there with me. And finally, I had one cousin step up and say, I'd like to go. And that was Denise Russell. We started planning our trip and found that we had a tour already in place. And so we went on that tour. I'd like to backtrack just a little bit and tell you a little bit more about how I was brought up and who I am, because it took me many years to figure out I'm very proud of who I am. Being brought up in America by foreign parents was a little bit of a challenge for me because I'm in America surrounded by many, many, many different nationalities, different ethnic and religious. And it was kind of strange because my parents worked a lot. My father came, I believe, in 1924 to America. He followed my grandfather. My grandfather was widowed. He had my father and my aunt, and he eventually had both of them come over to Toledo, Ohio. Toledo, because it was an automotive state, and there was a tremendous amount of industry there. So a lot of the Kfarians did migrate to that area, as well as Detroit, Dearborn, Columbus, and they all were looking to prosper there. They came over on the quota system, my father and my grandfather, and they had people follow them. So as the first persons that came over, they then helped everybody who then came over, and they sponsored them. They helped house them, they helped support them until they could get on their feet. And so that's the kind of environment that I grew up in. We were in a community in the old North End in Toledo, Ohio. We were surrounded by Greeks. We were surrounded by Muslims. We were surrounded by Jewish people. We were surrounded by Polacks, one of which I ended up marrying. And we also had the Hispanics. We had every nationality you could think of, Hungarians. It was a real melting pot. And I grew up with every one of those people being my friends, my father's friends. They supported each other. They started businesses together, and those that could hired their friends, their family, and everybody else. Anybody that came over that wasn't able to stay very long, I can remember a story about my father's first cousin came, beautiful woman, beautiful, but she couldn't stay. And so he adopted her. So she not only was my cousin, but she was my half-sister. And then she got married and was able to stay and raise a wonderful family in Huntington, West Virginia. We just were there for everybody. I can remember my dad starting a business when he came to America with my grandfather. It was a little corner store. And in that community, everybody came to that store because of my father and my grandfather's reputation. There were people like Danny Thomas, who lived around the corner. And I remember the stories my dad used to tell about how Danny used to come and stand on the little stoop. As you opened up the door, he would stand there and he would tap dance and he would sing. And people would pitch pennies to him. And he would take those home to his family because they were very poor. And he had a brother who was ill. And a lot of that money went towards his brother. And it later became St. Jude. And that's how that got started. But Danny Thomas was a part of our life. It was Danny Jacobs at the time. My father went from business to business, starting them, selling them, supporting people that couldn't find jobs otherwise. During the Depression, I remember him telling me that the most important thing in life for a man is to feel that he's worthy, that he's validated, that he can support his family and feed his family. He had many people working for him, and his store was as clean as a whistle, but he'd ask them to sweep up the store. He'd ask them to clear off the counters and make sure they were dust-free. He asked them to straighten up things so that he could pay them so they could go home and feed their family. That's the kind of man that I was raised by. My mother was right there by his side, and that story is a story in itself. He came from Lebanon, and he heard about this beautiful young lady that was up in Canada. And he went up, he saw my mom, married her, came back to Toledo, and started a family. She was the daughter, let me see if I can remember all their names now. They were the Zuckums. My grandfather came over first from Lebanon to, I think it was Halifax in Newfoundland. And he was a backpacker. And he went from door to door selling thread and needles, and God only knows how he was able to support his family on that. But he did, and he would go back to Lebanon. And every time he went back, he had another child. Eventually, they grew up, and he started bringing them over to help him. And then he'd go back, and he'd bring a few more over. And then finally, he brought his wife and the last of his 7 children, which was my mother. They all lived in Canada. They mostly settled in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. And my mother loved that name, Charlottetown, and that's how I got my name, Charlotte. I didn't understand at the time how they got my middle name, but I'm told that my father, who had boys before me, wanted everybody to be named George after him. My mother said, nah, we'll name the middle. So it became Adib George, Jamil George. I came along and he says, okay, let's name this one George. My mother said, she's a girl. But she compromised. She named me Charlotte, God help me, Georgette. And it was a difficult name to spell, let alone tell everybody, but I managed. And I was not real happy with that name because I was different. As I grew up and started school, I not only had a lot of other battles, but I also spoke Arabic fluently. And now I go to school and I've got to learn English. And I did. Unfortunately, becoming Americanized, you lose a lot of the interaction with the community as far as speaking, understanding, and I unfortunately lost a lot of my ability to speak and to even read a little bit and write a little bit. But as time went by, I learned to cherish that more. I learned to cherish my name more because I was different. And I liked being different until I got to high school. We moved from our nice, comfortable community in the North End to a different part of town where I was now looking at people that didn't look like me. They were all blonde, blue-eyed, fair-skinned, and I used to have to walk down to the corner to get on this big yellow bus that I'd never seen before in my life to go to school. But it was a good life, and I learned to acclimate to that whole community and make a lot of new friends. So it was very, very worthy of that move. The house that my father had, that we grew up in, that I was born in, was a very, very large home. Fortunately, he made money. We were probably the largest house around, and it was a lot to take care of. My mother had a lot of illnesses, and that big home was just not suitable for her to be taken care of. And so they decided that they would sell the house. We had a cousin who was a builder, and he built us a one-floor home on the other side of town in the community where he was building a lot of homes. So we moved there, and it was a much better situation for my mother, by all means. My father, in having businesses, stayed primarily in the food-related business, and my mother helped a lot. So I was taken care of in our community by all the sittis, all the jiddis, all the amtis, everybody. I could go to anybody and feel like it was my safe place, my home. My father was a man of honor. He had integrity, honor, and respect for everybody. He respected everybody's worth, and he passed that on down to his children. My mother was like an angel walking down the steps. She could be cleaning floors upstairs and somebody knock on the door and say, Nahil, I'm hungry. And she would come down like a princess and start making kibbe and hummus and kusa and have a feast on the table within an hour. And that's what I grew up with. And I've never forgotten my roots. And I've always listened to the stories that my parents would tell me and where they came from and who all their relatives were. And I've almost felt a little bit like an orphan because my brothers were much older than I. And I felt like an orphan in that I wanted to find, who was I? How did I get to be who I am? Where did we all come from? I hear stories, but now I want to really see. And my father always said, I'll take you. But there was always a war, there was always a problem, and we never had a chance to do that. So then along comes the National Federation that takes us to Lebanon on this magnificent tour. And we ended up, Denise and I, with all these other people that wanted to eventually go. Couldn't get them to go in the beginning, but they eventually wanted to go. And it was one of the most rewarding experiences traveling with all of your cousins, because this village is so small, we're all related. And so we all traveled to Lebanon, and on our free day, we had the most magnificent experience. We got to go home. I got to see the house. It was kind of crumbling, but it was the first house that my great-grandfather built that gave protection and shelter to the Sads, my family. And I couldn't walk down because I had the wrong shoes on, and I really wanted to touch that house because it made me feel very present. So my cousin ran down the hill for me, and because I said, I want a brick, I want something. And it's just a piece of stone that was part of that house. And it's just a stone to a lot of people, but to me, it's symbolic of connecting to my great-grandfather, my grandfather, and to all the people that lived there, that suffered, that migrated to this country, that allowed me to be born, to have the wonderful life that I've had, to bear the children that I have. And I want to be able to pass that on to my grandchildren, my children, their children. I never want it to die because it's so worthy of a story to be told. Thank you very much.